All right, we are continuing in Hebrews chapter 11. Last week we got to verse 4. In chapter 11, Hebrews 11, we're going to be going slower than other chapters, I do believe, because we're going to take some time with some of this. But we're going to start at the end of chapter 10 again, because I think we need to, at least today. Chapter 10, verse 39, because it leads us into the definition of faith. And faith is going to be defined by the Bible. And chapter 11 is going to do a very good job in helping to define it. In that biblical faith, not, the word faith can be used in numerous ways, and we can have different concepts of what faith actually is. But let's let the Bible define what faith is when it comes to God. What is faith towards God? But in chapter 10, verse 39, the writer says, "But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul." So that's really the way this is going to begin. Chapter 11 is going to continue this in an understanding of believing to the saving of the soul. And in verses 1 to 3, he's beginning to define faith, what it is. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. We discussed that last week. "For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of the things which are visible." So faith is in things that we cannot see directly, but we can see the evidence for it. And that faith actually does have a substance to it, a substance that's going to be in our lives. Someone who has faith in something, that faith is going to show itself substantially. That faith is going to show itself by the action, by the attitude, by the character, and everything about that individual, if they actually have a faith in that. Now, in verse 4, we spoke of Abel last week. But we're going to read verse 4 nevertheless. All right. By faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he, being dead, still speaks. His faith still speaks to this day, and God wants it to speak to this day. And here we have it in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 4. Now, I just want to make mention concerning Abel that we didn't mention last week, is that Abel is only mentioned a few times in the Bible. Genesis chapter 4. Genesis 4, we have Abel mentioned there, and the events that surround him. He is worshiping God properly. Cain is worshiping God improperly. One is according to truth, the other is not. Abel is murdered by Cain. Now that's Genesis chapter 4. We also have him being mentioned in Matthew 23:35 and Luke 11:51. That is Jesus speaking of the prophets that have been slain, the righteous that have been slain through time. And then Hebrews 11:4, where we are now, and Hebrews 12:24, and that's it. That's the only places where Abel is actually mentioned. And Hebrews has already been doing things like this, like we were talking about with Melchizedek, and mentioning Melchizedek and an understanding of what was spoken of or written in Psalm 110 and verse 4. But Melchizedek had only been mentioned one time before Psalm 110, and that was Genesis 14. Well, here we are with Abel, and a very similar thing going on. Abel didn't live a long life. Abel is martyred. That's precisely why he's killed. He's killed because of his faith. And then this is being brought back up in Hebrews 11, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. And those, God testifying of his gifts, what's that? Of his worship to God. God testified that his worship was acceptable, whereas Cain's was not. Now, we go to chapter 5. We go to verse 5. We're still Hebrews 11, verse 5. By faith, now we come to Enoch. By faith, Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony, that he pleased God. Now, it is of note that Enoch is mentioned in Genesis. He's mentioned in Genesis one time, and it's in Genesis 5, and it's in a listing of genealogy. And sometimes we can think of genealogies as being of no point, but there is a point. There's an extraordinary point actually in it. You may not see the point, or others may not see the point, but there is a point in it to show a direct lineage between two individuals. And it's highly important genealogies with that of under the law of Moses. Nevertheless, information is being given concerning Enoch in a listing of genealogy, of listing his father, then Enoch, and Enoch has Methuselah, but Enoch, he is taken by God. Let's go ahead and go to Genesis 5, and let's just read what it says there. Genesis chapter 5. And we begin in verse 18. Jared lived 162 years and begot Enoch. After he begot Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Okay, so that's Enoch's father. He lives 962 years and he died. Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. After he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now that's all that is spoken of Enoch in Genesis chapter 5, and that's it. That's all there is. And notice that he lives 365 years. He didn't die on this earth. God took him. He walked with God and was not, for God took him. And what does Hebrews 11:5 say? By faith Enoch was taken so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. So that's going back to Genesis chapter 5 and verse 24. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. So he could not be found. You're not going to find him. You're not going to find his body. You're not going to find him. He's not on this earth because God took him. Now, we have this testimony concerning him, and there are other places where Enoch is mentioned. 1 Chronicles 1:3, also Luke 3:37, and all of these, both of those, 1 Chronicles and Luke, concern genealogy. Okay, and really don't mention anything about his character so much. But we do have in Jude 14 more information concerning Enoch. Jude 14 it says this, Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints to execute justice, or rather judgment, on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. So, what Genesis didn't provide, and what First Chronicles didn't provide, or Luke or Hebrews, Jude actually is now, all these centuries later, providing a direct quote from Enoch. This is what Enoch actually said in his day. And Enoch, as it says, is seventh from Adam. And this is extremely ancient times. And of course, it is pre-Diluvian. That is, it's all before the flood. And if we go back, and you don't have to do this, but if we go back to Genesis chapter 5, we will see that Jude was right. He is the seventh from Adam, seventh generation. If we count Adam as one, all right, Enoch comes in at number 7. Now, why does that matter so much? One is that Jude, like so many other places, and we have mentioned this, matter of fact, Hebrews is doing it, is confirming Genesis as truth. Okay, Hebrews is doing that. When it brings up Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, all right, that's a lot of, then Isaac and Jacob, and that's a lot of Genesis. And Hebrews is confirming Genesis is true, and so is Jude, and so is Christ in numerous places, because Christ spoke concerning of Abel, also in Genesis. Okay, so we get back to chapter 11, and now let's read verse 5 again, because verse 6 is going to give us another comment on faith. Verses 1 to 3 is a comment on faith. We have 2 examples, Abel, then Enoch. Then we'll have another comment on faith, then we'll get to Noah. Okay, so by faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. Now, we come to verse 6. But without faith it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So this is continuing to define what faith is. Hebrews 11 goes a long way, but Hebrews 11 isn't the only place to tell us what faith is. It's not the only place. But Hebrews 11 is going to give us statements like verses 1, 2, and 3, like verse 6, but also which are direct statements, but also going to give us examples. And notice what it says. Must believe that he is. Who is that? For without faith it's impossible to please him. Who is that? That's God. All right? It's impossible to please God without faith. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, that God exists. You can't have faith in God if you don't believe he exists. Okay? You can't do it. Now, is that enough? Not according to this verse in Hebrews 11, and not according to really any other verse. And I'm going to bring up once again James chapter 2 and verse 19, because it goes hand in hand with this. All right. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, must believe that God exists. James 2:19 states that you believe that there is one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. All right, the demons believe there is a God. Were they seeking him? No, they know very well. Are they seeking to be obedient to him? No, not in the least. Can one, like a demon, believe that God exists and have nothing to do with him, do not want to worship him, and just go off in their own corrupt way? And the answer to that is yes. There's plenty of people. Too many people. One is too many, but this world is filled with such people. that they do believe God exists, but they will not obey Him. They won't do it. But it says in verse 6, for he who comes to God must believe that He is, all right, that's a must, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. It doesn't mean He's a rewarder to all those who believe that He exists, that He is. You have to believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So diligently seek Him is required, and then He will reward the one who has faith in Him and diligently seeks Him. We will see this throughout this chapter. Every person in this chapter is an example of that very thing. Every person. We've already started with Abel and then Enoch. Now we're going to Noah. But every person in this chapter does this, is an example which the Bible teaches in an extremely powerful way, trying to help us understand what is biblical faith. What is it? And we could have thousands and millions of definitions as to what biblical faith is, ranging from absolutely nothing to who knows what. But let's let the Bible define it. Let's let the Bible tell us what that faith actually is. So we have this comment in verse 6, this direct statement in verse 6. And with this, He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. We see in verse 33 in this chapter, that's exactly what He did. That's what He did. But if we go back up to chapter 10 and verse 39, which really starts this chapter, but we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. So there is a process, or there is obedience that is expected, it is demanded, it is what God has called us to do. That it's not only believing that He is, but He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. So it is a matter of diligently seeking Him. Now, let's let the Bible define what diligently seeking Him means. Faith and also diligently seeking Him. Okay, now, verse 7. We get to Noah. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen. This goes exactly to what we have seen from, or what is written in verses 1 to 3. All right? So that the things which are seen were not made of the things which are visible. And this is of having faith in things that you cannot see. If God says there's going to be a worldwide catastrophic flood, could Noah see that flood 120 years before it occurred? No, he couldn't. He couldn't see that flood. He couldn't see it at all. Could he see the flood as he's building the ark? No. It took faith. And it took faith in God to build that ark specifically as God commanded. And we'll get to that in just a second. But Noah was faithful in all things. He was obedient to God in all things. All right, so starting verse 7 again. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So this is Genesis 6 and 7. We see this Noah being called, being separated. Let's just go there. He moved with godly fear. Well, what does that mean? He moved with faith, knowing that God was going to bring this about. Was it a fearful thing? Yes. If you could witness that flood, everyone would agree it was a fearful thing. And we can see evidence of that flood all over the world and can know it had to have been a fearful thing. But let's go to Genesis chapter 6, and we'll begin in verse 13. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Who is them? It's the rest of the earth. Noah and his wife, his 3 sons and their wives will be the only ones to survive this, along with the animals that are in the ark. But they'll be the only humans to survive this. He's going to destroy everybody else in the flood. Now, he says he's going to do this. The end of all flesh has come before me. Or is that a fearful thing? Yes. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. Its width 50 cubits and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark on its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing a flood water on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Okay, is that something to be fearful of? Godly fear was the motivator to, in fact, build that ark and build it specifically as God said. Now, God is going to give more information, more things that Noah and his family are to do. But if we look, we see at the end of Genesis 6, verse 22, thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. He didn't add anything, he didn't take away from it. If it is to be 300 cubits long, that's what he did. If it's to be 50 cubits high, or rather 30 cubits high, that's what he did. 50 cubits wide, that's what he did. Gopher wood, nothing else. Pitched inside and out, that's what he did. He did everything God asked him to do. And now this is brought up as an example in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7, that by faith Noah did this. So there is faith, and what's the substance of that faith? It's this enormous ark that, in my mind, pitch is black. In my mind, I don't know if pitch could be made in a different substance and it's not black, but in my mind, the ark is this massive wooden black box in my mind, because that's what we see. I mean, that's the wording. That's the wording in it. And maybe it was brown. I don't know. I guess there could be clear pitch, or there could be brown pitch. I don't know. But that's what I see. Nevertheless, in this, Noah there's a substance for his faith. And it's everything he did according to the will of God. Everything he did. From the dimensions, upper, middle, lower decks, the rooms, the food that was supplied, we didn't read that, the window, the door, everything about it he did. That is the substance of his faith. Not the total sum, but that is substantive, is it not? And we've already seen concerning Abel in the gifts that he gave God as a thing of sacrifice, a thing of worship. And also that of Enoch, and that he walked with God. And he pleased God. And it wasn't a pleasing God because he just believed that God exists. Once again, demons do that. It is an obedience. And if we go into Jude 14 again, we see that Enoch was a preacher. All right? The Genesis doesn't tell us that. Genesis 5 doesn't tell us that. But it tells us enough to know Enoch was a very righteous man, because unlike the others in chapter 5, Enoch didn't die on this earth. Enoch is taken. Enoch is taken away. Now, we go to, let's read verse 7 one more time. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things yet not seen. All right. Can't detect it, can't see it, but God told him. Moved with godly fear. Why? Because he had faith. Because he had faith in what God said. Even though it was something he couldn't see, he couldn't detect, God told him it was going to happen. Therefore, he did precisely what God called him to do. Prepared an ark for the saving of his household, of which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Now, this is according to faith. Everything he did was according to faith. But by which he condemned the world. How did he condemn the world? How did he do that? Because, one, he condemns the world when he does not behave like the world. They have a certain ideology, he does not. They have a certain doctrine, he does not. They despise the truth, he does not. They go off on their wicked ways, he does not. They do whatever, they could be warned as well. The Bible doesn't say they weren't warned. They could be warned as well. And it means nothing. He is warned and builds an ark, as he's told to do. Others may very well have been warned. Now, they're not required to build an ark, but they could get on that one. And I think there would have been space for more. And definitely, if a little bit of time of saying, yes, I believe God too, that there would have been provisions and everything made for additional passengers. But they're not there. They don't arrive. And no one so much as gives it much of any commitment whatsoever until probably it's too late. It's way too late. Now, he condemns the world by his faith. Now we come to Abraham, and there is more given on Abraham in this chapter than any other person, as far as by way of text. Matter of fact, it's just of note that Abraham is actually in 3 sections. He speaks of Abraham, then we'll go to Sarah, back to Abraham, then give some more comment, and back to Abraham again. But by faith, verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out of the place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. God calls him out from his home. His home is in Mesopotamia. His home is Ur of the Chaldeans. Okay? Ur, now that's extremely ancient civilization, and that's the time of Abraham. And it just so happens we're doing the life of Abraham on Sunday mornings. But like we said, Abraham his life is before such notables as Hammurabi. Hammurabi, we think of him as being ancient. Well, Abraham was a little bit more. So Abraham was dead and gone before Hammurabi's even born. It's about a 100-year span thereabouts. Of course, there's a lot of you can't be absolutely accurate, but it'd be about 100 years between the two. But he's called from his home. He's 75 years old, Abraham is. He's 75 years old. And he's called to leave Mesopotamia, and he's going to be leaving it. And there is a promise, a land promise, that is given to actually his descendants. It's a promise that's going to be to his descendants. And when Abraham, or Abram, is called out from his home, one, he'll never have a permanent home again. Number two, he's 75 years old. 75 years old. And number three, he has no children. At 75, he doesn't have the first child. As a matter of fact, Abraham considered his servant, Eliezer of Damascus, his heir. Eliezer is not related to him. Eliezer of Damascus, he considered to be his heir. And I guess the closest relative, other than Sarai, or Sarah, his wife, would be Lot, who's going to be traveling with him as well. That's his nephew. Now, he is going to be given a promise, several promises actually. One, there's going to be many descendants of Abraham. Now, prove that wrong. Prove it wrong. You'll have a chore, because history shows that's correct. History shows that's precisely what occurred. It's another one of those things in the Bible where, okay, for the skeptics, let's just ignore that one too. There's a lot of that goes on. And when someone wants to suppress the truth, it doesn't matter how many truths there are. If you're willing to suppress that God is, if you're willing to suppress that truth, you're willing to suppress anything. Okay. Now, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out of the place which he would receive as an inheritance. All right, there is an inheritance. And he's called out from there. And he went out not knowing where he was going. He doesn't know. God is just taking him through the years to various places. And he's traveling to these various places. And no longer is he going to be in Ur of the Chaldeans. He's not going to be in Mesopotamia anymore. Why is that? Well, one is, his relatives, and I think it would be safe to say he would have relatives that are heading toward idolatry, because Mesopotamia is thick in it. Mesopotamia at that time was quite thick. It does not, we mentioned this on Sunday, that it doesn't take long for people to go from absolutely understanding Jehovah is God to deciding they don't care about that and they go into idolatry. It doesn't take long at all. And we looked actually at Israel doing that at the base of Mount Sinai. It didn't take long at all. And when Abraham is called out of Ur, there are all kinds of gods and goddesses and the like that are being worshipped in Mesopotamia. Now, he's calling him away from there, and there's going to be a greater inheritance, a greater promise. One is a land promise that he won't see fulfilled, but God will get there in his time. It's not time for it to be fulfilled during Abraham's life. But Abraham had faith in it nonetheless, which is the point. That is the point, that God gives the promises, and sometimes those promises won't occur tomorrow or next week, but when God brings them about, they will occur. And it's a matter of faith and faithfulness, of following Him, understanding that God will never lie to us. He will never lie to us. Now, we go to verse 9. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. So here is this land of promise, but it hasn't been given to him. It's promised, and that promise won't be fulfilled until we get to the book of Joshua. When we get to Joshua, we see where, it was God completed that promise. They now had that land. Now, there were still pockets of Canaanites there, Pharisees being one, not the only one. There were still pockets of Canaanites still living in Canaan, or we call it Israel at that time. All right, that's not God's problem. That's not because God didn't remove them. It's because Israel stopped removing them. Cleared Jericho completely. Cleared other cities completely, other areas completely, but then became lax and not realizing that you don't clear an area, the people living there will be a problem for centuries to come. Now, he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country. It has been given to his children, but when he's going through it, he's a foreigner. He's a foreigner to it. It doesn't belong to him. And the same is true concerning Isaac and Jacob. They are heirs of the same promise because that is the genealogical line that is going to bring about Israel, and there's a greater promise still. Greater promise than just a nation or many people being descendant from Abraham. There's a greater one, and that is of the Messiah himself, who is a direct descendant of Abraham through Israel. Now, we go to verse 10. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. That's not Canaan. That's not Jebus, which in his day, it may have had another, no, in his day, it had a different name entirely. It's Salem. Yeah, Genesis chapter 14. It's regarded as Salem, which would become eventually, in David's day, it become Jerusalem. But we have this city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. That's not Salem, that's not Jebus, that's not Jerusalem, that's not Canaan. This is something greater. This is something far greater than anything on this earth, whose builder and maker is God. All right, that city which has foundations, that immediately reminds me of the 12 foundations that John sees of that city coming down. 12 foundations of this extraordinary city. And it is the one that has those gates of pearl, one pearl per gate. That here we have this city. This is an extraordinary place. The builder and maker is God. That's what he was waiting for. That's what he looked forward to. Now, here is the point. Once again, these promises did not come about in the lifetime of Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. They all had faith in God that in time God would do it. God would do it. And that this city with foundations, whose maker and builder is God, that was something that wasn't going to be seen in this lifetime, in Abraham's life on this earth. Nor will it ever be on this earth. But Abraham didn't see it, couldn't see it, but was looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. And that's why he is willing to follow God. That is why he is obedient to God. That is why, as we will see, he's willing to do things that God calls him to do that is a true test of his faith and is showing a substance that his faith has. His faith has a substance. If it didn't, he wouldn't have left his home. If it didn't, he would not, as we will see in a few more verses, have done what God called him to do concerning Isaac. Now, we come to Sarah, verse 11. So we have this slight break with Abraham, but we'll come back to him. By faith, Sarah herself. So she's actually the fifth person being discussed in this chapter of the faith of Sarah. Now, by faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. So this is taking us to Genesis chapter 21. And yes, it is true that Sarah did laugh at the notion that she would have a child. She did laugh at that notion. But we also need to understand that, did she have a child? Yes. Did she have faith that that was going to happen? Hebrews 11 says she did. Hebrews 11 says she obviously did have a child. Hebrews 11 says that she did have faith. Regardless of her first the hearing of this, regardless of that, she did have faith that this would happen. Now we come back to Abraham. Therefore, from one man, that's Abraham, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. That's as promised in Genesis 22:17. That is as promised. And we'll just bring up the challenge again. Prove that to be false. Prove it to be false. Note how many people on this earth today alone, this very hour alone, actually have a legitimate claim of being a direct descendant of Abraham. There's a lot. There's a lot. And it's not just Jews. It's not. If you think it's just limited to Jews, you don't know your Bible. It's not limited to Jews. It is also the Arabic world. They rightfully trace their lineage back to Abraham. And I say rightfully because it's true. And they do have a lineage that goes back to Abraham. It's not with Isaac, but it's with Ishmael, a son of Abraham. All right, and Ishmael, his mother Hagar was an Egyptian woman. So Egyptians actually are part of the lineage of the Arabic world. Ishmael's wife was also Egyptian. And how many today can rightfully say they are a direct descendant of Abraham? It's a lot of people.
What about descendants of Keturah?
Yes, that's correct. And Abraham's second wife, Keturah. That's exactly right. And that this is a promise that God kept. Well, name a promise he didn't keep. There isn't one. There isn't one. So, if God kept his promise concerning the flood with Noah, if God kept his promise concerning the son, that'd be Isaac. If God kept his promise concerning the land promise, if he kept his promise concerning also that of the Messiah, All right, and we're not through yet. If he kept all those promises, and he did, what about the promise that the Messiah will return, that Jesus will return? What about the promise of final judgment? What about the promise of that city with foundations whose builder and maker is God? What about that promise? What about the promise of hell? That too is a promise. If those others he has kept and has kept perfectly, okay, we can understand by that example, by these examples, that he will keep his promises, and we must have faith in that. We must have faith. Christ may not return in our lifetime. May not. Don't know. But what does that mean? That means we continue till we die. We remain faithful unto death. That's what we do. And but in time, there is Judgment Day. Now, we'll continue next week with in chapter 11 and discussing more of the topic of faith, because it's an extremely important and often debated and misunderstood subject that the Bible is trying to be extremely direct, is being extremely direct, showing by way of example, by way of direct statement, and also by way of implication in this chapter. And thank you, everybody.